I know everybody's getting stir crazy. You've been at home for what seems like forever, and as we're sequestered and isolated, I'm glad that we can actually continue to talk about God's Word through this kind of media presentation. I'd like for us to discuss several chapters of the book of Psalms this week. One that you've read or reading this week, and some that you've read previously. We're not dealing with a chapter that you have not already read this year. David deals with every emotion of the human heart. And in times of crisis such as these, there's no better book really to focus our attention upon than some of those chapters in the book of Psalms. So for this instance, I want us to talk about Psalm chapter 143. And the way that Psalms have been categorized by various scholars and commentaries, this is the seventh one of what's been classified as penitential Psalms, where there's a penitent heart that you see, there are requests that are involved. And it really kind of fits more than 7 chapters. And even in the Septuagint, the title of this particular chapter goes back to Absalom and deals with David as he's writing because of the revolt of Absalom. And whether that's really true or not, don't know. There are a lot of manuscripts that do not have a heading such as that. But it's really a question of how do we focus on the problems that we face. And this chapter deals with the guidance and deliverance that we have from God. So here's what it says. Hear my prayer, O Lord, and give ear to my supplications. In your faithfulness answer me, and in your righteousness. Do not enter into judgment with your servant, for in your sight no one living is righteous. The enemy has persecuted my soul. He has crushed my life to the ground. He has made me dwell in darkness like those who have long been dead. Therefore my spirit is overwhelmed within me. My heart within me is distressed. I remember the days of old. I meditate on all your works. I muse on the work of your hands. I spread out my hands to you. My soul longs for you like a thirsty land. Answer me speedily, O Lord. My spirit fails. Do not hide your face from me, lest I be like those who go down into the pit. Cause me to hear your loving kindness in the morning, for in you do I trust. Cause me to know the way in which I should walk, for I lift up my soul to you. Deliver me, O Lord, from my enemies. In you I take shelter. Teach me to do your will, for you are my God. Your spirit is good. Lead me in the land of uprightness. Revive me, O Lord, for your name's sake. For your righteousness' sake, bring my soul out of trouble. In your mercy, cut off my enemies. Destroy those who afflict my soul, for I am your servant. Now, if we go back and kind of dissect the chapter, verse 1 and verse 2 really are the petition that you find kind of intermittently woven through the rest of the chapter. Hear my prayer, O Lord, give ear to my supplications. In your faithfulness answer me, and in your righteousness. Do not enter into judgment with your servant, for in your sight no one living is righteous. That petition carries with it several things. The word that's translated in your faithfulness literally means firmness. It's something that can actually be translated as truth. So in your faithfulness, in your firmness, in your truth, answer me, and in your righteousness. Mercy is really something that's suggested in verse 2. So the petition is not just for the truth of God, the firmness of God, the rightness of God, but also the mercy of God. Do not enter into judgment with your servant, for in your sight no one living is righteous. So verse 2 mentions or characterizes that mercy of God as recognition of the sinfulness that David himself feels. And this particular phrase, you can almost hear it mirrored in what the Apostle Paul writes in Romans, that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That's a recurring theme in many of these chapters in Psalms. The problem, so there's the petition. I really need God's firmness, His rightness, His truth. I need His mercy. But here's the problem. The enemy has persecuted my soul, crushed my life, made me dwell in darkness, and overwhelmed me. And my heart within me is distressed. Those phrases, those words out of verse 3 and verse 4. The statement that's made down in verse 4, my spirit is overwhelmed. The word really carries with the idea of being enshrouded or covered with something. It's like I've got a blanket that's just come over me and I can't see a thing. So persecuted my soul, I'm dwelling in darkness, my life has been crushed, my spirit's overwhelmed. And the last one, the second one in verse 4, so there are several of these kind of phrases in this problem that he faces. My heart within me is distressed. The NIV uses the word dismayed. The English Standard as well as the New American Standard say appalled instead of distressed. The word itself almost has a meaning of I'm just stunned. I can't believe this. With everything that's happened, everything I've tried to do and tried to be with the way that I've endeavored to live for God, even though David was imperfect and acknowledged that, I am stunned. I'm shocked. I am so surprised and maybe appalled by this, but in distress over this. I don't know what to say. I'm in shock, maybe would be the way that we would say that. So there's the problem. So how does that filter into what David writes in the rest of this chapter? Well, the first thing he does is think about the past. And sometimes in view of our problems, we do that. Now, what he says about the past begins in verse number 5. I remember the days of old. I meditate on all your works. I muse on the work of your hands. I spread out my hands to you. My soul longs for you like a thirsty land. That's the present situation. If you go back and think about it, look at the words, okay, I'm remembering, I'm reflecting upon that, but it's more than that. The second word he uses, New King James says meditate, really carries with the idea of pondering. It's something I'm thinking about over and over and over. Well, maybe it's the same as meditate, but you find several English translations, newer ones, that actually talk about or use the word ponder. I'm pondering all these things that have happened in the past. The one that's interesting is the word that the New King James uses in that third category. I remember, I meditate, I muse on the work of your hands. What does that mean? To go back and look at the lexicons and how this term actually can be defined, it's almost I'm talking about this. I might be internally talking to myself about this. I'm reminding myself of all this. But it's more than just thought. It's actually some talking that's going on. Audible or not, he's reminding himself of all the things that happened in the past and how his soul longs for God. Instead of I spread out my hands, sometimes in some of the other translations, I stretch out my hands. It's recognition of his inability to deal with these issues the way he knows that with God's help he can. So there's the petition in verse 1 and verse 2. There's that problem in verse 3 and verse 4. He thinks about it in terms of the good things in the past, and he remembers all of those in verse 5 and verse 6. In verse 7 and 8, here's the present. Answer me speedily, O Lord, my spirit fails. Do not hide your face from me. Lest I be like those cast down into the pit. Cause me to hear your loving kindness in the morning, for in you do I trust. Cause me to know the way in which I should walk, for I lift up my soul to you. Past is one thing. Here's the present. I am hurting so much that my spirit fails. Even after he is remembering the good times of the past, even after he is pondering those blessings from God, even after he's stretching out his hands to God, my spirit fails. I need an answer. And I need an answer now. So how do I deal with that? Well, cause me to hear your loving kindness, verse 8. Cause me to know the way. If I do that, then I'm taking the focus off of the problems that I'm facing and off of the inadequacies that I feel. I'm not looking at the mistakes that I've made, even though I may be remembering those. I'm not dwelling on them. I want God's help. I want his guidance. I want to learn. I want to hear what he has to say. I want to know. So by the time you get down to verse 9 through verse 12, the rest of the chapter, here's the process. So we've had this petition that he's mentioned, the problems that he addresses, the past that he reflects upon, and he still has this burning problem in his spirit, in his soul, in his heart to deal with these issues. So as he takes a look at the present situation, he knows he needs more to be more attentive to God, to learn more from God, to follow the way that God would direct him in verse 8. So in verse 9, 10, and 11, deliver me, in you I take shelter. Verse 10, teach me, for your spirit is good. Verse 11, revive me for your righteousness' sake. If you're using a different translation, verse 11 may not say revive, it may say preserve me. Now, whether or not this was a chapter that was written when Absalom had actually forced David to flee Jerusalem, and David finds himself actually out in the darkness, out in the wilderness, and he's essentially an outcast because Absalom has stolen the hearts of the people. Whether this is that situation or not, we find ourselves in similar circumstances where something has gone terribly amiss. And we think back to those things, those times where there are tremendous blessings from God. And in the present situation, we know that we need to know more of God's Word, and we are imploring that we will learn those truths that God has given us in this inspired book. But then the end result, the process is still being delivered from our adversaries by God, being taught by God to do His will, being led in the land of uprightness, verse 9 and verse 10, and being preserved for the name of the Lord our God. Verse 12 ends by a request again in that petition that God's mercy would cut off the enemies and destroy those that afflict the soul of David. And he ends with this statement, for I am your servant. We go through difficult days, and perhaps none as difficult as what we're facing right now. And with the uncertainties, how long is this going to last? How long am I going to be able to function in a culture that seems like 90% of it is closed and it just doesn't work anymore? And if you're in one of those situations where the company that you're working for has closed its doors for now, how do I survive? So a lot of frustrations and a lot of feelings that we have are very close to what David pens by inspiration in Psalm 143. What he prescribes in looking for God's truth and His Word, knowing His way and following it, are still things that we desperately need to do. Don't be discouraged. Keep your spirits up. Remember that God's with us. Stay safe. We'll talk again.